Thank you so much for, accepting our humble invitation to be in this exhibition.
God, the show is amazing. I really, really. I mean, we saw it yesterday, right? It was memorable. I mean, I took pictures. Usually, when the show is good, I always come home with a bunch of pictures. I'm very happy to be part of that. Definitely.
You're also I just noticed how incredibly generous you are because you know, you know, you give up so much into your paintings, but you also give so much to the works that you're seeing. When you're seeing them, you're like completely open and receptive, and you want to. And I could feel how palpable it was. This thrill to be in the presence of art after.
I needed it. We talked about it, and I'm very, very happy that we got to see it. I wasn't planning to stay that long, but I was like, an opportunity to see good art. I'm gonna take it.
I mean, we've had some pretty amazing and intense conversations, and I was really happy that you were, I don't know, really open. We hadn't actually met before. I've been seeing your work, I don't know, maybe since the May exhibition, when was that? 6 years ago or something?
Yeah, something like that.
I don't know.
It was in 2012.
Oh, geez.
So it's literally 8 years ago. A lot of things happened in the meantime.
A lot of things.
A lot.
And so, when I contacted you, finally, you were in Germany.
I was in Germany.
Packed up your studio, and so, it was a really amazing first conversation. And so it's sort of hard to know where to start, with a capsule type of thing like this. Maybe.
Well, we always have a good conversation, so I trust you. I trust you.
Okay. Memorable. I mean, I would love to hear about, where it all started for you in terms of, I mean, I think from my research, it's about drawing. But do you know about when you started to draw and what brought you to that? What drew you to that? Or making marks, or?
Well, I mean, to be honest with you, it started for me with an installation. I did an installation in my room, and my mentor at the time was giving me a lot of catalogs and a lot of books about installation, actually. So, I mean, inevitably, I started painting because he's a painter. He also did installation. So I think he influenced me in a way to get into painting. But at first, my encounter with art was with the space. It's like, what can I do? How can I organize a space? Which is something interesting because I'm probably going to come back to that. I feel like I'm slowly coming back to that. And with the paintings, the paintings are slowly becoming more like objects, and I'm adding elements to them. And these elements are slowly coming out of the painting also. So this is something that I mean, that's how it started, and from the space of my room, I started creating space within the paintings, So that's also kind of a way for me to talk about the space. And then drawing, obviously, I think it's only now that I'm really, really working with drawing in a more interesting way, because I'm understanding components like paper, how to create fluidity on the paper and things like that. My drawing practice has become more and more complex over time, which is something that I really appreciate, because that informs my paintings, So, yeah, I mean, it started with space and adding elements to the space, to creating space within the paintings, which took time because I wasn't a good painter when I started. I mean, I was terrible. I think I was trapped in the material of it. I wasn't really using my head.
Well, I've read that, interviews that you've, where you've talked about drawing as being a way to think through. And so is it kind of like a mental gateway to the painting?
It's definitely is. I mean, the way that I deal with art is something that is putting order inside of myself, you know. And drawing is an interesting way because it's very immediate. You know, it's not like with the language of painting, you can organize, reorganize, and kind of hide, and then use different tools to kind of like get to where you want to go. And in drawing, it's very direct, and it's something that I really like. You don't have as many shortcuts than in painting, for example. And um, yeah, so drawing definitely informed and helped me organize my thought. I mean, but it's strangely enough, it's more demanding mentally. You know, like if I'm doing a painting, because the language is different, I can use several elements um, to get to where I want to go in terms of composition or erasing and applying over and over on the same surface. Um, it's kind of I'm less afraid to make mistakes. And I mean, there's a painting actually behind me, as you can see. This one, it's kind of like I was talking to a friend this morning, and paintings like that, it's like it's like chess games, you know, which is very the one right here, which is kind of a little bit more kind of uh, shaky and crazy. Um, it's kind of a chess game because there's certain things that you do, there's some mistakes that you cannot do, um, because it's like a one stroke kind of thing, which is very close to drawing in that sense. So it forces me to spend more time with the work. You know, the work is not just in the doing at that point; it's also in the thinking of how can I project my ideas and organize the painting in a way that I think is physically and mentally intriguing for myself. You know.
I get that because you've got that one-to-one relationship with your drawing tool and the surface, and it's indelible, and you want to make that mark intentionally, I can imagine, and in drawing it's sort of unforgiving that way, so you want
Yeah.
to be like thinking two steps ahead like you do in in
Well,
a
the way that I managed to avoid that is uh, paint with powder, drawing with powder, uh, and also using the paper as a material to actually be part of the drawing. You know, I came to realize that the first thing in a drawing is the paper. You know, if you understand, I mean, when I understood that, I started really treating my papers differently than if it was something that I was applying a drawing on. You know, the materiality of the paper alone is something that can be used in that language. So that's why I became very picky with the papers that I use, and how I treat them before with the inking
Mm.
and you know, now the powder is adding something completely different that I'm still trying to kind of like play with. You can see a little bit of that in the painting in the show, the entitled painting. You know, there's like you can see there's like a um, I like the feeling that it's a painting that you could. It's hard to understand how I did it because I don't think I actually did it. It kind of happened, and I like I came. I mean, I went from like making paintings to actually trying to find them in the process. You know, like finding an object or finding. I like the idea of patina a lot. You know, it's something that because I think we're you know I mean it's very truthful when you see the patina of someone, you know, on
Mm.
someone. You know, the wisdom or the scars or the depth of somebody. It is something that I'm very sensitive to. And I'm trying to bring that into my work because, these objects, they have their own intelligence. So if you manage to kind of like have a relationship of finding them instead of creating them, you actually give them more space to evolve.
That's super interesting because in the way you talk about the drawing process and what it does, you're working with the mental and the cognitive and the details and the materials. It's very kind of like mind oriented, and then your paintings feel like they completely engage with with the body and the spirit,
Yeah.
but the mind is always in there, like it's there but it doesn't take over. Like that there's, you know, in everything I see in your work, there's always a struggle against binary thinking,
Yeah.
and a kind of desire to for all of these aspects of the, you know, the mind, body, and soul to be appreciated for their interplay, like how
Yeah.
they work together. Would you, so, you know, talk to me a little bit about, you know, kind of where the body comes in, the body and the spirit.
The there's something I like to say is like, I want the work to take your eyes, and then take your body, and then take your soul. You know, I think it's exactly what I wanted to happen, because it's an object that you encounter, you know, visually, and then physically it calls you, and then it feeds your soul one way or another. Um, like this is something that, you know, the I like to believe that the work I'm trying to do is exist between these elements. You know, I'm not trying to kind of like take each element and then put them together, because if I'm being honest with you, it's impossible for me to completely understand my soul or my body, you know. So I try to kind of, I'm always, I think for me existing is always being between these things, you know, and your certain things like your intuition, your sensibility, tie these things together. And I think making art is a way for me to stay in a place like that, where I'm constantly asking for my intuition and my sensibility to make these things always be around me, you know, I mean, fortunately or unfortunately, I don't control these things. You know, I don't control my, I mean, I can't say, okay, I'm going to take a bit of my soul and add it to that, and things. I think um, when it becomes slippery, you know, the harder it is for me to grasp it. And I'm letting my intuition guide me in that sense. That's when I know I'm on a good path.
Mm.
And in the body of work I did, um, with the fabric and the burning and the ink, and which is a new body of work I'm working on. One of the things it was really important for me to do is not to start with my head, you know, because um, a friend of mine was telling me yesterday, there's this investor, his name is Soros, um, in the alchemy of investment. He was telling me when, for example, and it's funny we're talking about investment, because, you know, that has nothing to do with art, but he said something that was really important, because I was looking at Pelagian chart map also, which is something that we can get into later. But he was saying that when he feels like he needs to buy a stock, his back hurts him, and when he does buy it, when he buys it, the pain stops. And we were thinking about, this guy's 80 something. So we were trying to understand what intelligence means, what intuition means. And when you're making one with something and you're surrendering to it, that thing also surrenders to you to a certain point. And the mistake that I didn't want to make is to put everything into my head, into the knowledge of what I'm doing. Um, because a lot of the things happens in ways that you don't really understand, and it's important for me to create room for that. And the more I nurture my sensibility and my intuition, the more when I see these things, I can feel that they're right without having to justify. You know, the justification will come in due time. So this body of work that I wanted to do, I really followed my body. You know, I followed my intuition. I followed my eyes, you know, and because of the relationship, that the natural relationship that I nurture between my eyes, my body, and my soul, if my eyes and my body is attracted to something, then I know that my soul is approving it. You understand what I'm saying? And that's my barometer. That's what matters to me at that point. It's not necessarily how what we know of art today works, because it's very about like explaining what you're doing and trying to make sense of it. And I'm trying to move away from that a little bit, because um, I think more happens when you surrender to something that is not part of yourself, you know. Um, and I'm learning, I'm in the process. It's a process for me because good things happen and bad things happen, and I'm just trying to keep moving forward. So to answer your question, it's a relationship that is. I like to see myself moving in between these elements, you know, and feeling them for what they are more than uh, what I understand of them. You know?
Being in between is kind of like the thing, that especially those of us living in diaspora know a lot about. And in the in between is, I find, where the really interesting stuff happens, because we can't pull one thing apart from the other,
Yeah.
like your Haitian heritage, you can't pull that apart from, the part of you that knows what it is like to be a Montrealer, or, you know,
I came to an analysis with that, by the way. That idea of being several places. In cinema, there's a technique, editing technique that's called cross-cutting. Yeah. And the way it works is that they're showing you two actions, right? But they're happening at the same time. The editing, like it's like somebody's outside, there's a fire in the building, in a moment they show you what's inside of the building, and another moment they show you what's outside of the building with the pompier outside. And this idea of cross-cutting is interesting because the action, which means the presence of the viewer, or your presence, as a matter of fact, you can be present at several places at once. And that's the thing when you're in between, because it's like in between, but at the same time, you're present in different kind of realities. You know what I mean? And what is, when it becomes more interesting, is like when you're understanding that you are present emotionally in different places. Like I'm present with what's happening in Montreal right now. And because I grew up in Haiti, I'm also present with what's happening in Haiti, good and bad. I lived in Germany, and that's also a part of what I am right now. And the longer you stay, the deeper the roots and the connection that you make with the people and the land that you stayed, the more your capacity to deepen your emotions in relation to these places sharpens, and with that idea of cross-cutting, it really creates an overlapping of presence, and sometimes some emotions that just things combine inside of you or collide inside of you in ways that intensify your presence, your presence. Your presence.
I so dig that idea, because the idea of being in more than one place at the same time, and that every place you've lived or experienced deeply becomes part of that, right? It becomes part of your in between. Like I think about all your years when you were at Goldsmiths in London.
Yeah.
I mean, that's another layer,
Yeah,
right?
that's definitely in the people that I also encounter. I think it's really important to also underline that what really deepened the connections for me was the people, because there's also the land, because people live also through the land that they're from, the customs and the culture and the smells and the you know I think it's something that is really important to underline, because that creates a sense of elasticity in my humanity, to understand that, in Haiti, things are done like that. People do things like that for these reasons, and they really believe in them, In London, they do it like that. In Montreal, what it actually creates for me, it's a kind of like elasticity and understanding my humanity. And I think this is something, thankfully, that I carry in who I am and in my work, because I think, you know, being on the crossroads, it's important to 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 recognize these kind of things, you know, and people relate to it, you know, because when it's translated and people are exposed to it, it adds to their own elasticity of reality. And I think that's where the experience becomes richer. It becomes relevant for other people and precious for other people. You know? It's important for me to be aware, to stay aware of that, because it also gives me keeps me going, you know, in a sense. Because sometimes we forget that our hearts are not only beating for ourselves, you know, it's beating for a lot of people. Culturally,
yeah,
just culturally, the heart alone can mean something in different places. So that I think adds a layer to what I'm trying to do, what I'm trying to preserve in a way.
it seems, you know, like, you know, it's only when you're truly present, you know, that you can actually surrender.
Yeah.
You know, and like, I love the idea of the surrender, because, you know, as the artist, you're like, you're surrendering to the work before you, and then when the person experiencing the work has that connection with it, they too are kind of called into a kind of surrender, a kind of submission to, you know, to the work.
I think it's trust, you know.
Yeah.
I think it's a place of trust, you know, because I think the only way there can be a sense of surrendering, it's also because there's a sense of trust. You know, it's like trusting, you know, the intuition, trusting the process, and you know, when you go to museums or to art or to galleries, you're preparing yourself. You put your guards down to actually being touched and to experience something. You know, it's not even just about being touched, but to experience something. And I think that preparation is really important. You know, it's kind of like it shows your capacity to surrender to an experience. You know, because I think what we surrender to is the experience. You know, like when I'm making work, I mean, I don't want to say I surrender to the work, but I surrender to the experience of making the work. Because I think making the work, there's two things fundamentally that happens for me. First of all is I'm aware in the moment of my ephemerality, you know, because these objects will outlive me. Uh, yeah, I do certain things that I'm leaving behind. So I'm aware that I'm going, but these things will stay. And the other thing is that we're talking about the present. It's something that really intensify my present for me, making art. You know, in order for it to happen, there has to be a sense of trust, and that's where the surrendering to the experience comes into play. And then we can have a dialogue, you know, an honest dialogue.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
and I think that's very fulfilling for me because it's rare in a way.
The other thing, you know, that's really remarkable in terms of these ideas around surrendering, around kind of aura, and as you've mentioned in, you know, in
The book,
publication,
yeah, the spell on you, yeah.
spell, and that I, you know, I feel like because that it's enhanced because you work between a kind of abstract figuration, or, you know, it's like really, again, the binary is completely like thrown out the window, because you
Yeah.
work with something that can be understood from some figurative, there are some figurative clues, and then they melt away, they melt into this kind of abstraction, they morph, and they, you know, they tease. So, you know, I would love to hear you, you know, hear you talk a little bit about what motivated your, you know, your I guess,
The
exploration.
process of becoming like that.
Yeah, like moving between figuration and abstraction the way you do.
There's something I read that really, that's gonna kind of like help understand a little bit where I'm coming from. Bergson used to say the present is something that is forever becoming, you know. And I really like this idea. When I read that, I understood a lot of my work, because what I was trying to do a lot uh, is to find that thin line where you're looking at the image and you don't know if it's appearing or if it's disappearing.
Mm.
For me, it creates a point of tension where it forces the work, forces you to engage with it, because it leaves you pending for you to decide whether it is something that is manifesting itself, or it's something that is kind of floating away. Um, and for me, that's falls into the same idea of the aura, you know, of the work, of the actually the the kind of like intensity of the work, you know. And for me, intensity is, it's tied to time. You know, there's a time that the painting like imposes time on you, demands you to figure it out, you know, and you're a big part of figuring it out. So um, for me, these kind of things, they they um, they connect with each other,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Mm-hmm.
And you
Um,
know, the forever becoming for me is like,
yes.
it really got to me, because it's actually really what's happening to us. You know, it's kind of like we're in a constant state of something happening. I mean, the best example is our heart. You know, the fact that it's in our breath, you know, our breath, our breathe, I don't know,
Our breathing.
respiration, I don't know how to, yeah, the fact that we're actually, you know, consuming ourselves, you know, in a very poetic way, which is to breathe. I think it's something that is very powerful.
Oh yeah, I see what you mean. It's like we're, we bring in fresh air, we expel stale air, but that intake of fresh air becomes the stale air. So
Yeah,
we are consuming
we are
air in a sense.
beautifully doing it, you
Thank you.
know. Thank you.
I would like you know, um, figuration, abstraction, pictures,
Yeah.
images. What's in?
I don't think there's such thing as figuration, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
My understanding of that is something that is like, because reality, when we're trying to make a painting, we're dealing with an object and we're working with the concept of that image that we're doing.
Right.
So we're not actually working with something that is real in our head. So, you know, it's kind of like we process it. So we're actually working with a concept already.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, there's a relationship, you know, there's the word figuration, but my understanding of it is that we're always working with a concept or with thoughts and with ideas, you know. And it's not the perspective of conceptuality or things like that, but when I when I slow down the process, even when I'm trying to reproduce an image or the aura of an image, you know, I'm working with concepts. So I don't think there's such thing, you know. I mean, it has to be, I think, separated for historical reasons. But I think, you know, in several cultures, for example, in Haiti, the lines are blurred. There's no such thing as like, uh, for example, if you're trying to reproduce a spirit, yeah, which is something that is kind of like almost impossible to do. How can you decide this is figurative and then say that this is abstraction? Do you understand? Like, the
Absolutely.
subject sometimes itself traps you to make you understand that you cannot actually do it. You
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean? This is not something, I mean, you say it to communicate, you know, because reality is there's something when you touched it that is, when you touch it and so pure, and there's certain artists that managed to do it, is that it doesn't need word for it to exist. It's something that you experience. And to communicate it, then you're trying to find words for it to transfer that experience to someone else. But if you didn't have to do that, we would just be left with the work themselves, you know, and everybody would have had the right to experience them the way that they feel it. You know?
Mm-hmm.
So for
Totally.
me, it's kind of hard to, it makes me think of Sean Scully, you know, when he was doing his squares and things like that. He was giving them titles of very kind of like political titles and things like that, but they were squares, you know. So
Right.
maybe in his head, the guy was doing figuration. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of like, so where's the line? Where do you decide like this is figure, this is not? You know, I mean, historically speaking, yes, but for somebody who's like doing it every day,
Mhm.
it doesn't matter. I mean, I'm
Oh,
aware that I'm playing
I'm
with concept day in, day out.
so great. I'm so into that because I too have difficulty with trying to with the limitation of words and also the perpetuation of words to kind of reinforce essential binaries, and essential kind of ways of thinking about art, or
Yeah,
thinking about what's this, what's that, instead of saying why can't all these things just exist and why was it important. I think it was just a reasonable exercise to look at why
power,
conditions. Yes,
power,
yes.
power.
Why do we create schools? Why do we create, a canon?
Well, the question is, I like to keep it like simple when it comes to these kind of thoughts. It's like, who's watching what and where? You know, that's kind of a simple question, but that question holds
Got it
a
all.
power dynamic, an economical dynamic, and almost spiritual dynamic. You know, so, and I've been saying it for a while because if you just answer these questions, you see it. You understand why these things
Hmm.
were were done like that, you know, and contributed to classism and
Right.
all these kind of things. You know,
Like who's,
that's it.
what's the power dynamic? What's at stake for whom? And then we understand, why certain discourses become entrenched because of who they serve. And
That's it.
like, it's really great to, kind of scratch at that, because it reminds me too, when I'm thinking through the process of reading work and also talking to people about work, to
Hmm.
make that part of the conversation, to not take these things for granted and to understand that they, are formed by a certain kind of thought regime. Just the way that, we've always, this false notion that, like photo is indexical to
Yeah.
the object. It's exactly what you're saying. And so kind of to dismantle some of these ideas, which are kind of like part of this history, but we want to, keep on moving forward.
Hmm.
So I thank you for that. And I would love to also now talk about, the subject matter, like there's a lot of stuff that you get into, in what you paint, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot that seems also like inspired too by ideas around kinship, around like family, or around history and heritage, but then also, things that are really about this melting, like this melting from like body to fauna, to
Yeah.
foliage. Maybe I could, let you tell me more about what informs the pictures.
Well, the, the there's different elements that I kind of touched over time, and I'm being more and more aware of them. You know? And for example, I worked with my family, and I don't think I was doing that before an accident I had where it really changed the dynamic I had with my family. Um, and also, um, there's some cultural references to Haiti. And the way that I approach them, it's not just from a cultural perspective, but a historical one too, because it's something that you know, I had to sit down and ask myself, what are the things that I can talk about and that I can bring a you know, a very personal perspective to, you know, because I've experienced it personally, because some of my family did, and my country did in a way. And in that process, I had to study artists that that I grew up around, but I didn't know about, you know, and that really, really helped me understanding the cultural legacy that I was also that I wanted to underline, you know, because I have a very kind of Western academic uh, studies and things like that, but he wasn't really paying justice to my understanding and vision of the world, you know, because if art is there to nurture spiritually, then coming from a place where we've been nurturing ourselves spiritually for over 200 years, it's something that I wanted to also talk about, you know. So I had to go back and study certain masters that I consider were classics, and they're informing my work right now, and I'm actually very happy about that because um, I think it's important to uh, you know, immortalize these kind of legacies because they're kind of like being swallowed by an overall perspective. So these are the things that you know, an historical, cultural, a personal, also perspective, and and also leaving 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 room for the work, you know, like for what I'm discovering, not just what I want to apply on the work. Because and it's, you know, when you look at my journey, it's connected. You know, I started, you know, I worked on dictatorship in Haiti. I worked on my accident because it was something I really wanted to get out of the way. And then after that, I really wanted to talk about sobriety, for example, you know, or rituals.
Mhm.
And I talked about these things in a very particular way, um, and sometimes personal, or sometimes I was working with the medium itself, because I think it's really important to understand that it doesn't matter the culture or the background. You know, like there's something happens when an object feeds your soul, and not just it. You know what I'm saying? And it doesn't have to be even called art at that point. It's just something that just resonates with you. And I try to. This is where I'm trying to go, in a way. You know, and I'm in the process of unlearning.
Mm.
It's hard because strangely enough, the best way to unlearn is not to have shows, from my understanding. It's for the work not to be seen for a while.
Mhm.
You know, not start conversations that are not matured enough. It makes me think of Jack Whitton. I have his book here, his notes. And one of his notes was saying, okay, I'm going to start this new body of work, or I have this idea. Now in order for me to understand what's going on, I need to stop showing for a year. You know, that was his, because he understood his level, he knew his level of dedication. He understood that that's what he's going to do with his life. So he gave himself time. He understood, look, if I'm going to do this for another 40 years, what if waiting for a year working on something is going to change? It can only change for the better, because maybe after that year, he might just not find anything, you know? And I think that's really powerful in a way. So I'm kind of like in that space right now. I don't know if you answered your question, but it's kind of
It,
like, it started with the question and I was like, you know what? I'm trying to unlearn.
this is tell me about what's in
I
your.
don't want to learn anymore. I don't want to learn anymore.
Well, it's
I just
awesome.
want to have juice, go to the park. Your beer would be better, but no,
Yes,
but it's a, you know, it's a process.
but I mean, it makes sense to I mean, unlearning means when,
Yeah, what is unlearning? You know, what is unlearning? Is it
yeah,
undoing? Is it erasing? Is it that alone starts another discussion? Is it like questioning what you already know? Is it like,
right.
or starting from scratch? I mean, maybe the way to understand unlearning, it's about learning and maybe trying something you don't know, trying to play the guitar,
Mm-hmm.
like go trying to learn how to sew, or I don't know, trying to learn about making watches, I don't know, doing something that you don't know nothing about. And while you're in the process of learning, then you can slow it down and be like, okay, how do I actually assimilate reality?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe in that process you can be like, okay, I need to then like reverse engineering my thought process, you know. I don't.
In any case, it feels like it's about exercising humility,
Yeah,
in all of its guises and not
definitely.
assuming anything. Um, but in terms of like getting, the subjects that have motivated peace work in you, the exploration of the Haitian dictatorship is, a really big uh, terrain, to unpack, especially in painting the way you're doing it. Your accident was in London, right?
Yeah,
When you hit by a motorcycle, and
yeah.
you broke your jaw, like your face was like
It's
really,
like a horror movie.
so that the body then and your relationship to it becomes another, thing. If you didn't know about your body before, you certainly did then.
Now,
Yeah.
the little story is that, um, I had all these accidents, and I broke my a concussion, and I didn't have any scars. And when I was recovering, I realized that I wasn't carrying any scars. But I mean, I had bleedings in my brain, so I was carrying a scar, but inside of me. And the connection was that the land that you were from also carries things that you are not aware of, you know? And that's kind of like what connected me with that story, with the dictatorship. Because I was born in 86. That's the year that it ended. So I grew up in a country that had 30 years of dictatorship. Like how did the country, the land, recover from that trauma? And when you growing up, you don't see it, but you're still carrying that thing inside of you. So I knew I'm carrying these kind of like sequels of headaches and fatigues. I know where they're coming from, but from the outside world, for somebody who's just meeting me, these things, they don't exist until they unpack them. So I think when it comes to the land, it's something it's a connection, and we all carry that. It's not a matter of me. It's like no, the land we're in carries stories, and it's important to acknowledge that.
There's incredible scarring due to even if you were born after the period of colonization, the period of decolonization, which is intensely violent, and then a
Mm-hmm.
dictatorship, which is completely psychically, linked with internalized colonization.
Mm-hmm.
We will carry these. We carry these things, and I think it's really, like art can be there for us,
Yeah, yeah.
to share these stories and make sure these histories from your perspective, from people's perspectives that are outside of, the usual power circles, are transmitted,
Mm-hmm.
this way. I mean, it's extremely important. um, and when you're talking about, scars, it makes me think of Imaginary Landscape, which is in the show,
Yeah,
and where you're incorporating a new material in
yeah,
work, which has also been scarred. It's been, like there are traces of items, dust, debris from your
yeah.
studio floor into this new material. I mean, I find it really kind of poetic but coherent, but also like, the material, the color of it, the whole thing, it like really takes us deeply into, these ideas, of scars and trace.
Yeah, the found object, like you
Yeah.
know, I think it's what I really like about the idea of dust is it's something that is unseen. It's not something that you see, you know. It's something that is it's invisible, but it's something that is present, you know. And when you add it up, you know, when you clean your room over and over and over and over, then you see it like, you know, claiming its presence. And it's something that um, I like this idea of the invisibility. You know, it's something that is not for you to see. You know, or you kind of like you don't want to see it necessarily, and then to take that and to make it so visible that it's part of a work. Um, you know, and also what created these dusts, and you know, the idea of the landscape, an imaginary landscape, also adds to that. Um, I think yeah, this is an interesting piece. I'm happy you decided to talk about it because it's a piece that I'm still kind of like processing, you know, with the
Oh yeah.
materials and with the visual. I want to work more with that material. I think I'm gonna try to do more of
Someone in the gallery was saying it's kind of like the whale blubber, you know. It's
it.
like you know, and put and it's so visceral and
Yeah, yeah.
you
It's
know.
something. I mean, I'm thinking of an installation with that. I'm probably gonna do it. It's kind of like, you know, but you know, it's the thing. People can touch it, so they see it, but they can't imagine how like maybe
Hmm.
silicone is kind of like, yeah, it's very like you said, bodily.
Yeah, it's very I don't know, guttural or something. Maybe to close out this conversation, I would like to talk about Saint Jack 3, the painting with the burned
Fabric, yeah, Saint Jacques, yeah,
Saint Jacques, and because I really feel like there's a passion, you know, there's like this
yeah.
passion in it.
There's something emotional in that paint, you know, and something I think that thankfully the painting carries, but I don't, you know, in the sense that I think I did a, I think I did a, I think I managed to give the painting something, or to help manifest what the painting had inside of itself, you know, because it can be very emotional, and I don't paint with emotions, you know, in the sense that I'm not the artist who's feeling things and then using that feeling in the paint. You know what I mean? It's kind of like it's again, it's that sensibility. It's like you see the ways that the painting can be, and then you push it in certain directions. But it has to be. That's why I don't drink. I don't smoke when I'm working. It's like I drink tea. It's something very, very calm. You know, I need to be in control of what I'm doing to get it to where it needs to go. And I think that control, or that kind of like calmness, manage like helps me get the work to a certain place of vibration. You know, because I don't get distracted. You know, I
Mhm.
talked to you about the chess game. It's like you need to be focused. You need to know how to do this, because when you're dealing with colors and composition and things like that, sometimes it just needs one black dot somewhere in the painting. If you're not looking, if you're not feeling, you're just gonna miss it. And I think the puzzle of that painting is something that
Mhm.
inspired like another painting that's called Redemption, because it comes from an image, a very powerful image. And that image gave me a lot of work, you know, just like a new body of work I'm starting that I discovered um, about Romain La Prophétesse, which was a kind of warrior during the revolution. And he kind of was a transgender, and he had kids, and then he had several spirits inside of him also. And that creates kind of a fluidity that you find in my work. And when I find subjects like that, where it's kind of like, it's hard to grasp. The harder it is to grasp, the more I'm interested in it. And Saint Jacques is a good example of that. And it's the first painting that I'm using fabrics like that. And I was telling you that this is, because when we talked about the show, I was very excited, and and that's where I was also in my head. You know, when we have our conversations, we were like, you know, finishing each other's sentences, and I was like, okay, this is the I have ideas for that, and I can incorporate my ideas, you know, in something concrete and make something very powerful out of it.
It's an extremely powerful painting, and because of, you know, I think about this fabric is kind of shroud-like, and then the brittleness of it, like you can sort of see with your eyes, you can feel with your eyes how dry it could be, and like how the burning of it has to be
Yeah,
extremely controlled.
yeah.
Otherwise, it could be, you know, other
Wow,
things.
that it was a dance, you know. See, that's like when you're playing with fire. It's funny because there's a drawing I did that's called Dancing Around a Fire. And when you're burning fabric and you're trying to control it, you're kind of dancing around the fabric because you need to, you know, tap here and then walk here and then put a little bit of fire there, you know. And I think that that movement creates a very interesting paradox because the image is still. The woman in the image is still, but you can tell there's something very fast that happened with the fabric. And that this kind of contradiction for me, that's again the place of tension that I was telling you about appearing and disappearing. It's kind of like
Yeah.
it forces the viewer to spend time with the work because there's a visual contradiction. You know, I work a lot with contradiction because they're infinite. You know, you can just play with that puzzle forever. You know. So
That's, yeah, why the in between is so, you know, appealing, you know, but and that, you know, she's this figure at the center of the painting is kind of like consumed by her own, you know, rapture in a way that
she's surrendering too, though. That's the beauty, I think.
yes.
In the image, she was very. And that's why the other painting is called Redemption, because I really felt like she was in a space. She was she, she trusted what was happening. You
Right.
know? So I think it's that's what makes the painting the contradictions very strong because the environment seems unsafe, but she's very, you know, mentally trustworthy place.
Man, you know, I could talk to you for like
Yeah, the entire day. Huh? Yeah, we have a good conversation.
and you know, it's like, damn, it's been 3 hours. You just
I know, I know that. I'm like, what? They're gonna have to do a lot of editing. We're gonna have an hour of conversation, you know. So I mean, I was like, okay, I'm happy, you know. I wouldn't stop it. But
um
I know you gotta go. I know it's 30 minutes, you know.
oh
So
well, you know, hey, it's what it
when we
is.
have more time to talk, you need to come to the studio.
I'm gonna come. I'm gonna come
Yeah,
see
next week
you.
for sure. I'll wait for you.
Thanks a lot,
Thank
Manuel.
you for your time, and I see you again very soon, huh?
Indeed. Take care.